There was a fifth script on the record wall, and nobody in the Registry Hall could read a single mark of it. Rosa Okafor stood at the human height rail with her tea going cold in her hand and watched the unreadable line crawl upward through the four she knew: Tcharn, Sul, Vask, Compact Standard. A band of dark, deliberate, utterly opaque glyphs rising past languages that at least pretended to mean something to her. The fifth script had first appeared 4 days ago, in the last hour of a docket cycle, climbing the wall under a procedure with Rosa's name on every line. She had built that procedure 2 seasons back, a way for a people whose dead the Accord had recorded as property to file a receiving and have it stand, keyed to the act recorded and not to who filed it, so any dispossessed clade could use it without needing her. She had put her name on it on purpose, so it would be harder to disappear than a person. She had not, it turned out, made it hard enough to disappear. The annex smelled the way it always did at midshift. Warm record stock and the faint ozone of the wall's scroll mechanism, the roll of a Sul record cart somewhere down the worn floor track. Rosa had been 2 years in some at this posting, long enough that the smell meant work, not strangeness. She had defended one grave here against a Sul house twice and won twice. She had made a door anyone could walk through. She was, by the careful arithmetic of the reach, no longer a small officer doing small work, which her supervisor had told her was the worst thing that could happen to a liaison officer, in the tone of a man reading a forecast. The people who had filed in the fifth script were waiting in the recess gallery. They had been waiting for 4 days. They were called the Oru, which was the nearest a compact standard throat could come to the sound Sul archivist had once written down, and it was very nearly all anyone could tell her about them. Here is what she could tell her. 31 standard years ago, the Accord's commercial layer, the Sul, who registered everything that could be owned, had logged an Oru vessel as recovered property in a disputed ban, salvage value assessed, claim cleared, the entry closed. The vessel had not been cargo. It had been a vessel of people, and the people had died in it, and the dying had been recorded as salvage because the only beings who could have said otherwise wrote in a script the registry had never been able to read. A claim that cannot be read cannot be entered, so nothing had been entered. For 31 years, the Oru loss had sat in the Accord's record as a number of tons recovered, uncontested, because every instrument the registry ever offered the Oru required them to be legible first, and they were not. Then Rosa had built a door that did not require it, and the Oru had walked the long way to a sector registry and filed. She put the cold tea down on the rail. She had read the procedure 40 times since the fifth script appeared. She knew the way you know a tooth is going to need pulling, where this was going to break. Reyes found her at the rail. He had a slate, which he always had, and the careful flat expression he wore when he had read something before she had.
You've seen the reconciliation notice.
I've seen that there is one. I haven't seen what it says.
It says the filing can't be certified. Not that it's false. Clause 4 still holds. Nobody's going to call a receiving a lie. Not that the filer has no standing. You fixed that. The procedure's keyed to the act. Congratulations, it worked. It says the registry can't certify a record it cannot read.
Rosa looked at the wall. The Oru filing had stopped climbing. It hung 2/3 up where the reconciliation flag had caught it, the warm amber of a live line draining out of it into the cold blue-gray the wall used for a record under review.
That's new.
That's the point. They couldn't strike it for being false, and they couldn't strike it for who filed it, so they're striking it for being unreadable. And here's the part you're going to hate, so I'm going to say it once, and then I'm going to pretend I didn't. Nobody upstairs is unhappy about it.
He said it the way he'd told her 2 years ago. That's diplomacy, Officer Okafor, in the voice of a man sending someone where he didn't want to go himself. Rosa waited. The qualifications were dropping out of her sentences the way they always did when the spine arrived.
Say the rest.
You built a door anyone can walk through. Upstairs has spent 2 seasons not being able to close it because Clause 4 won't let them strike a true thing and your procedure won't let them strike the filer. This illegibility is the first lock they've found that fits. Certify the unreadable ones and the registry has to read everything anyone ever sets in front of it, which it can't. decline them, and the door quietly becomes a door for the four scripts only. The Vask, the Sool, the Tcharn, and us. Everyone the wall already reads. Nobody has to strike anything. The door just stops opening for people nobody can read.
Which is most of the people the Accord ever failed.
Which is most of them, yes.
The reconciliation docket closed at end of shift. Rosa had until then to make a record the registry could not read into a record the registry could not strike. She had no translator because there was no translation. She had a procedure that had just been turned, very cleanly, into a sieve. She went to look at the thing nobody could read. The long records vault was 3 galleries down. The deep Sool archive, amber-tinted record stock going back further than the annex itself, where a commercial council coordinator kept the oldest entries in the sector. Rosa had requested everything the Accord held on the Oru, which had taken a Sool archivist most of a day to assemble, and amounted in the end to very little. The 31-year-old salvage entry, a handful of cross-references, and 3 scanned placements the registry had captured and never once parsed. The coordinator was a Sool of no great seniority, 3 voices by the throat chain, polite in the multi-clausal way of a people who built their afterlife out of recorded transactions. Rosa had learned from the Sool that everything that is a transaction gets remembered. She had used that against a man who tried to make her own precedent quietly vanish. She turned now to the Sool because if anyone in the galaxy had ever read a placement, it would be written down somewhere a Sool could find it.
Anywhere in the long records, a reading of an Oru placement, a key, a partial key, 1 mark anyone ever matched to 1 meaning, anything.
Officer Okafor, I have looked because you asked, and because a thing that is asked and answered is a thing that is remembered. There is no reading. There is the capture. The registry sees the marks. It is a very good eye. When there is the absence of any key, in any record this house holds. A placement is not a script. It does not sound. There is nothing in it to say aloud. We did not fail to translate the Oru. We never found the thing that translation is for.
You logged their debt as tons.
Well, we logged what could be entered. I am not proud of the entry. I am telling you it is the only one we could make. To enter a people, the registry must read a people. It read tons.
That was the whole shape of it, and it was worse than a cruelty, because a cruelty could be argued with. The Oru had not been refused. They had been unrendered, fallen clean through the bottom of a system that could only hold what it could read. Rosa wrote it in her notebook anyway, because she wrote things in her notebook, and then she went down to the recess gallery to look at the people her institution had never been able to see. She could not talk to them. She had known that going in, and it was still its own particular vertigo to stand in front of it. The largest of the 3 settled lower as she approached. Not a bow, she thought, just a shifting of mass, the way a person sets down something they have been carrying a long time. The cilia along its lower rim moved. There was no face to read. There was no sound she could parse as language. There was a being that had crossed a great deal of dark to ask one institution to admit that its dead had been people, and there was Rosa, and between them a gap that no instrument she owned could cross. She crouched because she was tall and they were low, and she did not want to be tall at them. She did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would land. She just watched. And the Oru, after a while, did a thing. It drew the reading slab close with 2 of its short limbs, and it opened the pouch, and it began, slowly, deliberately, the way it did everything, to place the set tokens on the slab. 1, then another a precise distance from the first, then a third, set in relation to both. It was not fast. It was not for her. She understood that. It was the way the Oru did a thing, the way a Vask tied a knot or a Sool entered a line or a human signed a name, a record being made, an act being performed. She could not read 1 mark of it. She could see with absolute clarity that something was being done, and that it was the same thing in its bones that Tav of Marikhold had crossed the dark to do. that civic hold had filed to do, that every dispossessed clade that ever found her door had come to do. A receiving, the placing down of a grief in front of a witness so that it would be held. She did not understand the words. She understood the deed. And that, kneeling on the worn floor of a recessed gallery built too tall for everyone in it, watching a being she could not speak to set down stones she could not read, was where Rosa Okafor stopped trying to make the registry read the Oru and started thinking about what the registry could be made to do without reading them at all. She found Vorm at the record wall because Vorm was always at the record wall when something was crawling up it that mattered. She had learned with Vorm not to fill the pauses. The Tcharn did not experience them as silence, so she asked her question, and then she waited through the long, composing time, watching the side eyes track the room while the forward eye stayed on her.
The registry can't certify a record it can't read. I understand the rule. I want to know how old it is. Was there ever an accord before there was a script the accord could read?
The pause went on long enough that a younger officer would have repeated the question. Rosa held still.
You're asking the right age of thing. The accord is older than its scripts. Before the registry read a single mark, it kept record. A note for record was a motion before it was a word.
The gesture, the hand motion you make.
Older than the present accord. It does not say a thing happened. It witnesses that a thing was done. The registry could enter a deed before it could read a claim, because a deed does not need to be read. It needs to be seen by one who is standing to see it, and entered by one who is standing to enter it.
The forward eye stayed on her. Rosa had the abrupt, vertiginous sense, the third register she'd heard from Vorm 2 years ago and never named, that the Tcharn had not so much answered her question as set a tool down in front of her, the way the Oru had set down tokens, and was waiting with the bottomless patience of a species that thought in centuries to see whether she would pick it up. She picked it up. A receiving was an act. Her own procedure said so, standing keyed to the act recorded, not to the filer, not to the words. The registry was choking on the Oru filing because a filing is a text, and this text could not be read. But a filing was not the only way an act entered the record. A deed could be entered by being witnessed. The accord had a mechanism older than all 5 scripts for exactly that, and the Reach had a workmanlike little instrument that did the same humble job. Section 419, Witness Attestation. I personally observed it had been built so a liaison officer could swear they'd watched a contractor's logs get signed. It did not care what you meant it for. It only cared what it said. And what it said did not require her to understand a single thing she had observed. She drafted it in her office in the last 2 hours of the shift, longhand in the notebook first because she didn't trust her interface to be private around the Sul, then on to the slate. She wrote it carefully because the whole thing turned on, getting one distinction exactly right. She was not attesting what the Oru receiving meant. She could not. She was attesting that a receiving had been performed, a completed cross-party act, set down before her, witnessed by an officer was standing to witness, and entered by a party was standing to enter. The content of the placement stayed sealed inside the placement, unread, the Oru's own, and no one else's. What entered the record was the deed. This people came and set down their grief in the form their grief takes, and it was received and seen. The registry could certify that. It did not have to read a mark to certify that. You cannot strike a witness deed for being illegible because it was never offered as a text. It was offered as a thing that was done in a hall full of witnesses on the worn floor of a recess gallery in front of an officer of the Reach and a protocol officer of the court. Reyes read it over her shoulder before she filed it. She felt him do the arithmetic.
You're not certifying the record. You're certifying that they did it.
The receiving is the act. The procedure keys to the act. I don't have to read the act to witness that it happened. Neither does the wall.
And the salvage entry, the 31-year-old one, the tons.
Rosa was quiet for a second. This was the cost, and she'd known it since the archive. The same cost she'd paid for a grave 2 seasons back.
Stands, I can't unmake it, and clause 4 cuts both ways. You can't enter a false statement to erase a true one, and that entry's true. They did recover tons. I'm not saving the vessel, I'm saving the marker. The record will say their dead were a people and not a salvage lot, alongside the entry that called them tons. Both true, both there.
Both there.
He said it the way he said things he was filing away.
You understand what you're actually doing. If this holds, illegibility's dead as a lock. The door doesn't shrink to the 4 scripts. It opens for anybody who can do a thing in front of a witness, whether or not a single soul can read them. That's not a wider door, Okafor. That's a door with no language requirement at all.
I know.
Upstairs is going to know it too.
I know that too.
A breath. Off duty alone, she'd have had a shorter word for it. On the record, she said,
File it.
it had to be done as a deed, so they did it as a deed. Rosa brought the Oru up from the recess gallery into the Registry Hall in front of the wall, where filings clear in public view, and any accord watcher in the sector could see what the court chose to witness. The largest Oru carried its reading slab. The hall went quiet busy the way it did when something was happening that the regulars wanted to be able to say they'd seen. The Oru settled. It set the slab down on the worn floor of the hall and opened the pouch, and it placed the tokens, one and another at its precise distance, and a third in relation to both. The same deed Rosa had watched in the gallery, performed now in the open, before witnesses, in the form an Oru grief took. Rosa did not pretend to read it. That was the whole point. She watched it be done, and when it was done, she spoke the words of a Section 419 attestation into the record, that she had personally observed the people called Oru complete a receiving in the form proper to them on this floor before these witnesses. Not what it meant, that it was done. Then Vorm entered the note for record. The Tcharn made the motion, the slow articulated hand, 3 fingers, and the under-wrist thumb, the gesture older than the present accord, the one that did not say a thing happened, but witnessed that a thing was done.
The court enters for record that a receiving was performed and witnessed in this hall this shift. It does not read the receiving. It witnessed the deed. Officer Okafor, Rosa, the deed is entered.
There it was, the 6th time. Her given name, set into the record at the exact moment a true thing was entered. The same construction every time, the meaning sealed the same as it had always been sealed. The question beneath, which the accord cannot answer. 2 years ago, it had frightened her. Now she heard under it the things she'd half heard in the recess gallery. The court had handed her the tool and then named her, on the record in the act of watching her use it. Not intervening, witnessing. The court watches. It does not intervene. She still did not know what the naming meant. She was beginning to suspect she was not meant to know yet, only to keep being named in deeds until the deeds added up to the answer. The 5th script began to climb again. It climbed past the reconciliation flag without catching, because there was nothing left to catch it on. The strike had been for illegibility. There was nothing illegible to strike. A deed had been witnessed and entered by parties of standing, and the wall does not need to read a deed. It needs only to carry that the deed was done. The cold blue-gray ran out of the line, and the live amber ran back in, and the 5th script went up the wall to settle among the 4, entered, held, true. It was a small thing on the wall, 1 line among hundreds. Rosa watched it climb and felt the specific tiredness of a win that costs. The salvage entry still stood, 31 years old, tons recovered, claim cleared. She had not saved the vessel, and she never could. But the record now said, beside it, in a deed the court had witnessed, that the dead in that vessel had been a people who came and were received. The marker, not the wreck. She had done this before. She knew exactly how much it was and how much it wasn't. She also knew what Reyes had named and what upstairs would name after him. She had not widened the door. She had taken the language requirement off it entirely. Anyone who could do a thing in front of a witness, any people the Accord had ever failed in any silence, in any script or none, could now walk through, and the institution had just watched the court hold it open. The target on her was not the size of a sector anymore. She had stopped being able to measure it. The Oru gathered the slab and the tokens, slowly, the way they did everything, and before they went, before the long settling low and the slow turn toward the docks and the dark they'd crossed to get here, the largest of them set one thing down in front of Rosa on the worn floor of the hall and left it there. A placement, small, 3 tokens set in relation on a square of the same slate as their bodies. Its own little record, made for her, of a thing she had been part of and could not read. She picked it up. The tokens were fixed somehow. They did not slide when she tilted the square. Whatever the placement said, it was meant to keep saying it. She held it under the bright civic light and turned it, and read nothing, and understood that she was not going to. She had a Tcharn pin at her collar, whose meaning no Tcharn would tell her. She knew, 2 galleries away, a vast trade clade held her as a witness in a grief she still could not fully carry. And now she had a slate of stones from a people she had recognized without comprehending a single word of, given to her by hands she could not speak to, recording an act she had witnessed and would never read. 3 things she carried from 3 peoples, and not one of them legible. She put the placement in the pocket with the notebook, where she kept the things she meant to keep. Recognition, it turned out, was not the same as understanding. She was fairly sure now that it never had been, and that this was the whole of her work and most of her life, and she had better get used to the weight of it. The 5th script settled into the wall above her, true and unread, and somewhere out past the docks, a people who had been tons for 31 years went home as a people who had been received.